because I remember making it home and coming in the door and collapsing in my wife's arms with my current daughter as my daughter there at my feet saying, I'm sorry, and I love you. Sorry. And yeah, anyway, sorry. And so it was so hard for me seeing all that. And I'm like, I'm not leaving here. I said, no, I have to go back. I'm going back now. I'm not doing this to her soul again.
One look and I breathe.
Welcome, everyone, to the Awakening to Love podcast. I am the Ascension coach, James Valentine, and we have with us Lorelei Drock, who has had multiple near-death experiences. We've had a fun time even before we got on this, and before we even started the podcast. And I'm just going to move out of the way and let her share her story of what these experiences have been and how they have impacted her. So Lorelei, I am giving it all to you. Take it away.
Thank you, James, and thank you for having me here, and welcome everyone. As James mentioned, I've had multiple near-death experiences, 4 so far. I'm hoping not to add any to that list. My first one was when I was 7 years old. We lived on about a 191-acre farm in the rural Midwest, Wisconsin. And so it used to be a quarry, and they had, while digging, they had struck a bunch of live streams. So we had about 5 or 6 ponds. Well, this particular day, my aunt and uncle who lived across the street came over, and I think it was probably a Sunday, because we always had it Sunday if people ever came over for dinner. And so my mom was busy cooking like chili or something in the kitchen, and my brother said he wanted to go check on the pond. It must have been spring, I believe, because they were talking about the bluegill spawning. So they wanted to go to that particular pond. So, of course, to get me out from underfoot, my mom's like, take your sister along. So my aunt and uncle and my brother and I walked back there. I would say it was like half mile, maybe even a mile, back into where this particular pond was. It had 2 different entrances. So my brother and my uncle went to the first entrance to check the bluegills. Well, I liked the other end because it was this deep area and there was a pier going out so I could go look out at the water. And there was another side area where there was tons of frogs. So I begged my aunt to take me there. My aunt was nervous around water, could not swim. Okay. So she kind of stood back. I went down and onto the pier. And so then I was on the left side of the pier, kind of looking out, and the sun was kind of coming down and glaring off the water. And I felt weird. I felt this weird, almost out of body already. It was the weirdest sensation. So I'm like, I'm like, I told my aunt, I'm starting to feel woozy. I'm just gonna go to the other side. So I was on the other side, and that's when my aunt's like, she wanted to check on my uncle. She almost always kind of had like a separation anxiety with him. She's like, I'm gonna go check on your uncle. Are you gonna be okay? Can you stay here? Be careful. I'm like, yeah, I'm 7, okay. And so she starts heading down the path, which is really overgrown with trees, so she couldn't see me when she started to go there. And all of a sudden, I was literally like aware one moment of being on this end of this like pier that they built out of like pallets and things, and the next moment that I became aware, my body is sinking off to the right, feet first, which still to this day doesn't make sense to me, but it was feet first. And I could see, I was like, I remember coming to and going, oh my God, if I take a breath in, I'll drown. I'm going to die. And as soon as I said I was going to die, as the bubbles are going in front of my face, I'm going, oh, and it was pure moment of absolute panic, like, because I knew I couldn't breathe in, and it felt like my ribs were just kind of, and I'm going, oh my God, and as soon as I said I was going to die, like surrendered to that, I was out of my body, watching it sink, and my hair kind of float out. And so I remember that the last time I really was aware and looking at my body, like I could only see the tips of my fingers, I was still thinking. Because everything then after that seems a little more all at once. So I'm above my body watching it sink, and then it's like my consciousness was looking for everybody else. So then it's like it connected with my brother, and I heard his thoughts. He was like, can I swim to her faster or run? And I'm out of my body laughing, going, you can't do either. Like, why are you thinking that? And And then my uncle was just having all of these, thoughts of, they're going to blame us. Oh my God, what happened? Kind of things. My aunt must have heard me fall in, because I see her coming back towards me, screaming and yelling at him and blaming herself and trying to figure out, because she knows she's closest to me, how she's going to get me when she can't swim. So she's thinking, oh, okay, if I go down here, down the embankment, and hang on to this, like, it kind of had like these knobs at the end post, and she's like, if I hang on to that, because it was a floating pier, if I hang on to that, I can maybe reach her and just kind of pull her in, right? So all this is going on in their thought systems, and I'm just kind of observing. It's almost like I connected to each of them. And then all of a sudden I get even farther up, if that makes sense. I felt like I was ascending. So then I could see for miles, and I see my mom back in the kitchen cooking, and then I connected with her consciousness, and she's wondering, what did we find out? Did we catch anything? Because my brother kind of wanted to go fishing, and just, she was, like I said, making chili. So it's like I had to check in with her. And the next conscious memory I have is being in this place of like clouds, kind of like foggy, and I could tell there was like a being with me, but I couldn't see him, like off to my left, but just that I knew there was someone there, and almost like they were presenting me. And all of a sudden I look up, and there is like there's like this gateway or doorway, I don't know how to explain it, but it felt like an archway, and or a stargate, however you want to put it in your terms, right? But it was this big round kind of archway, and there was this unbelievably bright light, like 1,000 LEDs shining in your face, and I felt so tiny compared to this. And it went from like a brighter yellow to amber to orange as it spread out, but it was immense. And I felt this overwhelming love, like a parental love time. Like, there's no words for these kind of experiences. You can't grasp it in a human form. That's the best way I can explain it. And I was at so much peace and so much love, and I just knew, like, I knew everything all at once. And I sincerely was like, and then I could see like this shadow almost of like a being within this light approach me, and I know we had this long discussion, and I'm pretty sure I saw what was to come, because they kept telling me, you need to go back, and I'm just like, no, you can't make me go through all this. I am not doing it. It felt like an eternity of this argument and the things they showed me that I should do, and that it, in the end, this will be this way, but I'm like, I'm not going through that. I know what it's like to be human, and I no longer sign up for this, and I'm like, I'm not leaving this for that, no. And so there was this whole thing that of all of that, and then it was all like in your head. It was like just a knowing, like you were reading this energy, and but then there was like literally almost like how people say they get downloads. There was this huge voice booming, and it sounded male and very authoritative. It said, "You have more to do. You must go back." But it was very authoritative, father-like, it was like, okay, I've had enough, as if it's like, go to your room. And so I literally was like this little child, because I felt little anyway, because like I said, this was so massive for me, and I felt like a little insect, so to speak, and I was like, okay, fine, like a petulant child. I still kind of had the consciousness of a 7-year-old, but the awareness of a spirit, so it was very weird that way. And so as soon as I said fine, next thing I'm back in this picture and seeing my body, and my uncle helping my aunt. I guess they just kind of pulled on my fingers and like reached out to me, she kind of was dragging me in. So by the time he got there, he helped grab on, and he carried me up the embankment, and they laid me on my side in the grass. And I don't remember coughing up any fluid or anything else. There was this weirdness. I was in and out, because like I said, I refused. I didn't want to go back to the body. I'm like, I'm with my body. That's enough. Like, that's as far as you're going to get me. I mean, so I was like in and out. I didn't feel connected. I think they said I didn't even speak till the next day. But it was just this weirdness. The next day, I clearly remember, it's like I have this weird photographic memory, and I remember talking to my brother, saying what he was thinking, and I asked him, why would you think you could do that? And he went white, his jaw dropped. He's like, and then he knew something happened to me. I mean, my mother did, just because I said, like, Mom, I died. And she was always my biggest advocate as far as, the changes that happened after that, because I'd had prophetic dreams. I could tell when a soul was preparing to leave and go home, and all sorts of different things. And it got where I knew enough that they believed me, and people would be like, but she was always my buffer, or she'd say it in a way, or she wouldn't say I said it, but I'm concerned about this, So, but it was very, very hard for me because at 7, I went from this pure love, and it made this world seem even more dense and dark. Like I couldn't understand why people weren't of that love, why they weren't kind to each other, why they were so hateful. And because I was so full of love, those around me could tell I was different, and they felt judged by it almost. So, my life completely turned around. It wasn't easy. People are like, oh, why can't I experience that? It's not always a blessing. These gifts, especially, when people were preparing to die, they looked like waxy dummies melting, and I asked not to see that anymore, so for a long time, I didn't really sense that. I can tell when people are ill, but I don't want to know when they're going to die. It was always 2 weeks before they die. And I almost felt responsible. Like I had an aunt, and I told her, she came to me, which was odd for me anyway. And she's like, I'm not feeling right. And the doctor's not. I'm like, make him listen. I said, this is not right. You need to go to the doctor immediately. I just had this sense. And he didn't listen to her, and she died 2 weeks later from an aneurysm. I felt, there's all that guilt, because things and you can't. My whole life was like, from that point to my next one was like deja vu. Like I knew 5 minutes ahead, 5 years ahead. And it was just like, I assumed from, pardon me, but from other hearing different things that, and I know I probably saw, like I told you, I knew I saw what I was supposed to go back to, but they wouldn't let me remember it. These were the ways I remembered it. It was almost like signposts. It's like, you're on the path you chose, that I'd get these deja vus. Anyway, so it was just very hard for me. And it seemed like almost like my life became more abusive after it, verbally, and just things torment me, because I was like, my family was hunters and shooters and all this stuff. And there was just a lot that it was just so internally wrong for me then. Like I became almost like the black sheep, people talk about, because it's like, I can't be that. And then they used to tease me, you're the mailman's kid because you just don't fit here. My second near-death experience was when I was 28. This one I don't remember a lot. I was just given the knowledge. I had it. I had a visitation from my deceased grandmother a few weeks before, and she showed us in a clinic. I couldn't really see her, but it showed me in the clinic, and it showed a calendar on the wall. And she said, we had tried to have this baby for a long time, and she said, this baby's not yours to keep. There will be more. And you'll be okay. You're safe. Just remember this. And she showed me the date on the calendar. Well, on that particular day, I was almost 3 months pregnant. We had heard the baby's heartbeat, but it had stopped. I started bleeding, so they took me to the ER because I was in intense pain. They did an emergency DNC, and they weren't aware of my sensitivity, so they gave me too much. I stopped breathing, and because of an iron deficiency that we weren't aware of, I started bleeding out. But they said I went home for healing only, so that I could have children, which I did have another premonition about how I was supposed to have this son long before I met my husband. Anyway, so all of these things kind of fit in, and part of what happened was, and how I knew what had happened is like my whole feelings afterwards. Like I was okay with it. I knew this baby was supposed to do various things, and why I helped filter it and give it that little bit of experience, and it came in to heal. And the doctor actually verified that for us. He was like, this baby didn't form properly. It was your body setting itself straight to have more children. If you want more children, you have to get past it and try right away. And we did, and we had my son, who was born delayed. He ended up being delayed, but this is the interesting part about it is, if I may share an after-death communication, is that okay? Okay. Well, about a week or so after she had died, my son was like 2.5, and my mother had passed. And I was just coming home, so I caught the tail end of this. My son was nonverbal. He had OTPT and speech therapy. And my husband heard him talking upstairs. So of course that would freak him out. He was up on the upstairs landing. He goes, he was playing with his trucks. He sat up there he was sitting by his bedroom. Well, he ran up there to see what was going on. And there was he was drawing the Japanese symbol for life. Okay, a kid that can't even write. Okay. And he drew it in my mother's favorite color. And my husband, this is where I come in. I see him and I get home and I'm like, what's going on? Because he was white as a sheet because he had just run back downstairs. And he's like, you're not gonna believe what happened. He's like, I had this thing with your mom. If there was life after death, to send me this particular sign. I wanted to know for sure. And he's like, go look, and yeah, there it was. And so after that, my son shifted after this visitation. I don't know what kind of conversation they had, but he became, more verbal and things. And as it progressed, we realized he was still more connected to the spirit world. He thought everybody communicated, in that way, like I did when I had my experience. And we found this out because he was repeating people's thoughts. Once he started like birth to 3, and especially when he got in kindergarten, they took me aside. They're like, what's with your kid? Yeah. And, and I had this whole thing about him being special and all this stuff, so the whole going home for healing makes total sense of this, right? So I wanted to play that into there, how all that happened. And like I said, I was okay with it. Everybody was so upset with me, and my husband had a really hard time. Upset for me, like, oh my gosh, you lost it. I'm like, everything is as it should be. I knew all this. And I had this knowing, and it was the same knowing afterwards. And the doctors were shocked because I'm like, get me off these meds. They're like, you almost died. We lost you last night. You need to take these because there's blood thinners and all these other things. I'm like, no, take me off. They're making me sick. And I did. And I had a huge argument with the doctor because it was at a hospital I actually worked at. And he's like, you can't do that. I'm like, yeah, good nurse, bad patient. So, yeah, so that was that one. And after that, it was even harder. Like I kept having all these different experiences of knowing things, or just like getting knowledge and connectiveness, and a bunch of other things that were a telltale sign of that particular event. My third one, I have a lot of autoimmune disorders, or I've been diagnosed with them, I should say. And this particular event, something stopped. The blood flowed to my brain. I was in the living room with my husband and daughter. And so I staggered backwards. Well, actually, let me regress that. I remember that I was like, what's going on? Because like my world started to get darker and darker, like kind of fade into a thing. And even though I could breathe and everything, it felt like I wasn't getting oxygen. It was the weirdest sensation. And anyway, so I started, he said, after this, I don't have a recollection, but my husband said I staggered backwards a couple feet, actually, fell into the door jamb. I cracked my head, he said, and then I appeared to seizure, and then I slumped over and appeared not to be breathing. But from my conscious recollection, I was instantly in that space of like floating clouds and everything else, and it appeared to be like this park, and I was sitting on this marble bench with a being that looked like my mother. However, I didn't sunset it with her energy, and I said so. I'm like, you're not my mom. And they're like, well, this was for your benefit, so you'd feel calm. And I never in my experiences, other than this one, saw any part of a physical body. But in this one, I saw my leg, and she was just kind of, how mothers or grandmothers, they rub your leg and say it's okay, right? And so she was doing that, and she's like, you've done enough now. You can stay. And all I could think about was my daughter, because she was in the room when it happened. But also, I remembered in that state of this other life, I don't call them past lives, that I had died on that same daughter at that age. I was a cobbler, it seemed like 1800s, in London. And my shop and my home were both on the right side of the road. And my shop was like, I think, a little bit further away from the bridge than my house. My house was like 2 houses over this bridge, and it was dusk, and I had just closed up shop, and I was walking home, and 2 men came out of the shadows from the other side of it. It was a short bridge over this creek, and they rushed up and tried to rob me. And the one closest to me had like one of these little musket ball. That's how another reason I can gauge the time periods in the cottages. A musket ball type handgun, and he had it aimed at me. So I remember taking the my coin pouch out of my breast pocket and handing it to him. And then he's like, no, give me everything, type of thing. And because I knew I had a pocket watch, I remember that. And the other gentleman's like, no, come on, you know, and he tugged on him. And because, I mean, those are hair trigger. I know this from a family of gun enthusiasts, right? And it just went off and shot me right under the right rib. And they were like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. You know, like, they didn't mean for that to happen. And they left. And part of this experience was that forgiveness, forgiving them and myself. Because I remember making it home and coming in the door and collapsing in my wife's arms with my current daughter as my daughter there at my feet saying, you know, I'm sorry, you know, and I love you. Sorry. And yeah. Anyway, sorry. And so it was so hard for me seeing all that. And I'm like, I'm not leaving here. I said, no, I have to go back. I'm going back now. I'm not doing this to her soul again, you know, because, and my daughter has remembrance of this, of like how they had to scramble and live off the wharf after I had passed. Because in those days, you know, the women didn't really work, maybe knitting or something, you know, but they didn't have anything because I had passed. Because my daughter's a near-death experiencer as well. Anyway, so she has remembrance of that. So, but the interesting part of all that is when I came into this life, I had a right-sided pain like that. My mother took me to so many doctors as a child, different studies, you know, I had upper lower GIs even throughout all of my years, because it used to get so painful I'd almost pass out. I remember once as a kid, I slumped over, knocked a bunch of cans and stuff down at the grocery store because it was so painful. Well, after this event, I haven't had it since. I found that forgiveness, it was like one of those other life cell memory type wounds. So I just wanted to share that as well. My fourth death experience was January of 2021, like the first week of January. Like I mentioned, the autoimmune disorders, and the week or two prior, I had issues, autonomic nervous system issues, where I couldn't swallow, and all of a sudden I would like freeze up or like forget to breathe for a second or couldn't make myself swallow. And that particular night I wasn't feeling very well. I went to bed and I stopped breathing in my sleep. And then I instantly had this memory of, once again, like this white shaded kind of foggy area. But this time I was with what I call like my soul family. I only recognize certain people in form because I do know them here. So I recognized my husband and my daughter were off to the left. I know we discussed this prior hand, my twin flame was in front of me. And one of my good friends at the time was to the right of me. And the dialogue between my twin flame and I and my friend and I was all concurrent. But behind them were like, I can't even count how many, like what I describe as light bodies. They look like iridescent bubbles, like that weird rainbow of these beings, like just everywhere behind them. But those are the only people I recognized. And it almost felt like I call it being called to the principal's office. So concurrently, this is what's going on. My friend is saying, if you want that body, you need to get right back in it now. Meanwhile, I have a concurrent memory of the embodiment, or whoever this person really was, this is just how they appeared, of my twin flame basically yelling at me. He's like, at your level of light, you have to be careful what you say and do. And they showed me, because in the near-death experience group on Facebook, it's one of the largest one, somebody had posted a meme about be lighthearted. You know, we learn in near-death experiences, you know, everything should be filled with joy, you know, of lame ways we died. Well, some people were putting, you know, different things about how they would like to go next time. And while I made a joke, I'm like, well, I want to go like Grandpa, not the passengers in his car. If you remember that joke, Grandpa fell asleep, right? So I want to go in my sleep. And they said, because of everything, you know, your level of light, the amount of things manifestation-wise, you have to be careful. There was this whole thing about the power of words, combined with thoughts, attention, and emotion, how it creates our reality, which I speak on a lot. But there was this whole thing with that. The interesting thing that I want to go into while I'm still focused on him, my twin flame knows something happened to me that night. He contacted me the next day. He's like, I did this thing. It was like this whole test where I had to drink from your body and everything else. What happened to you? So it was almost like a shared death experience. My friend as well came to me and she's like, I saw you dead in your bed. What happened? I saw you. So, but to switch to where she said, get back in your body now. You know, if you want that body, get back in it now. And I remember saying two different things as far as this is that I'm like, I've lived too many lifetimes to miss what's coming, because they showed me what's coming. I said, you know, this awakening of consciousness. And I'm like, I worked too many lifetimes towards this to miss this. Get me back in there, you know? So then it was, in these terms, it's very odd. I spoke of my body as a vehicle. I called it a vehicle. I'm like, how do I start this thing? How do I get in here? You know? And she's like, you need to swallow. And this is interesting because I have another friend who had an experience, same thing. And I had never heard that before, but they're like, you need to swallow. So I saw my body reach for a drink and do this. So I was half in, half out already. So there's like, you have to swallow. And I know how weird that sounds. So I was like, and I don't even have quite the memory of that. The next thing I know, it was like a horse kicked me in the chest as my heart started beating. Because as soon as I did that, I like, and I gasped him through throat, and then it was like a punch to the chest. And it felt worse than a horse kick. I mean, I've gotten stepped on by cows. It was pretty much that painful. It was, yeah. And so, and then they're like, okay, now do a systems check. I'm like, I can't move. I don't feel any of my body. So like, do a systems check. And they had me do this thing where I was like pulling energy from my feet all the way up to my head. And that, I have to say, was more painful than 27 hours of labor with my son. Like, you know, it's like your arm being asleep times 10 as all of my nerves came online. I just can't even tell you how painful that was. I'm so happy it was very, very brief, but very, very painful. And then literally you know, from being a medical person, I think I went into shock for like 20 minutes because I just sat there and it was like so much energy. I literally vibrated in my bed and I knew I had died. Like, and I knew everything that they were telling me about, and, you know, and all these things they wanted me to do when I came back, with working with consciousness and healing the land and being symbiotic. I mean, there was so many messages with it. And, you know, and I'm like, this little me. And I remember saying to them, what do you want from me? Human me is a ditz. I'm going to forget as soon as I get home back there. I literally said that. I'm going to forget. You can see how I'm living. I forget, you know, who we are and what we're here to do, you know? And I just remember that. And then I shook for about 20 minutes. And then I'm like, oh my God, that just happened. And like I said, when my friends contacted me the next day, it was the verification. I'm like, oh my God, I died. And this one was really the worst to integrate. It was the most profound. It was the most of knowledge that I was allowed to remember. And it was so hard for me to integrate that. And I realized, because of other experiences, I believe it was because at this age, I already had like half, you know, my children and a life. You know, the longer that you live, I guess they tell you that the more you're attached to it. So this one hit me harder, like, you know, I couldn't leave all that, you know, and if I really could have died compared to my younger ones, you know. But the interesting part was, a few months ago, I had another thing. I was going through like a health thing, and I'm like, I'm like, you know, either heal me so I can be of service or get me out of here. That's literally what I said. I prayed for Michael, and he said, I cannot remove an experience, something you've already pulled into your experience. You've already pulled this, you know, energetically into your experience. I cannot remove it. He's like, the only thing I can do is remove your attachment to it, help you ease your attachment to it so it moves through your experience faster. And then it was like a full remembrance of, oh yeah, or, it's kind of that old adage, wherever you feed, where your energy goes, where the mind goes, the energy flows. That's it, something along that line. And so they showed me how I was creating that suffering. So the integration is, I think, the hardest part of these experiences. So many, get down these rabbit holes or feel like they're going crazy. There's no such thing as crazy. There really isn't, because we live in a limitless environment. We have just forgotten that we can create, without those limits. The societal thing is kind of constructed. And as we are in these human bodies look for survival. They're still in that kind of mode where everyone was like me. If you're the outcast, you don't get fed, kind of, base consciousness per se. I don't want me to call it base, but it's our core programming, right? Because as a medical intuitive, I've had, when I've done scans, literally body parts speak to me, and some of them have really grumpy personalities, especially our digestive system, because the foods we're feeding, they're very grumpy on people, and they have different voices. But anyway, I get in all that. But so there is that duality, and what I was shown is that we're supposed to be symbiotic with that human consciousness and help evolve it into being a spiritual being in human form. That was part of it. My first death experience, I came back telling my mom two different things. Mom, we're in the larval stage. We're just these little butterflies. We're just caterpillars right now. Because they showed me, and it makes sense. Like, we're these caterpillars, and when we're ready to awaken and evolve, that's the chrysalis moment, I call it. When we turn back to this whole group and they realign our DNA and light bodies, it's the same thing. And then next thing, we take flight and are these multi-dimensional beings. But that's how my child mind could, speak of it. And I also remember I wanted to be a priest so bad. Like, I was supposed to be a priest when I came back. I was supposed to teach. In my mind, that's what I thought I was, because my family was Catholic, not stricter, that where we went to mass every day. My mom said she just got tired trying to deal 5 kids in a church screaming and arguing, right? But I came back saying I want to be a priest, and my mom was like, not in our religion. And I said, well, then it's not for me. Nature is my church. I literally said that at 7, and she's like, well, whatever you need to do. I mean, my mother was, supportive. She's like, well, that's how you feel, she knew something had happened to me, like I said. So, it's been a long, integral process. There was a lot of situations I got myself into, or, family dynamics that drastically changed because I wasn't the same person. I didn't fit in. I wasn't any of those things. Even through that, a lot of NDE people end up in divorce, and I was totally different after one of my experiences. And it wasn't a near-death experience, but it was like literally like I was a different person in that sense. And I wanted different things. I had goals. I wasn't just content to be a wife and mom, and that was totally unlike the person that my husband knew, so there was a lot of integration with that, and the relationships, so I understand where people are coming from, especially right now where so many people are becoming aware. There's so many people leaving relationships that no longer serve them, and that's just being authentic to themselves, but it doesn't make it easy. But I think that's the gist of most of my experiences. But my takeaway, if I may give it, is that we're meant to, like I said, to just be and experience and have these experiences. Source, I call Source God, showed me that we're a thought form that came into being, like a fractalization. I talk about fractals a lot, of that divine essence. And so whatever choices we make along the way, they've shown me there's multiple timelines. I've experienced it in real time. So we get so caught up on, like, am I making the right or wrong choice? Well, for spirit, there is no right and wrong. It's the expansions of awareness, of consciousness. So if you don't make that choice, the other version, it's going to play out. One of my experiences is like the boxes of potentiality are there. In the now moment that we sit in and create, everything is at once. It seems like chaos. And within that, there's no chicken or the egg. It's all at once. I've even been shown where, like, I can where I've like rewound, like I had a death experience besides these, and just literally rewound it and did not remember it. You know what I mean? So there's time is very fluid, where we are so linear. For spirit, we can come back and forth in time, and there is that fluidity, you know, if that's a word. But you know, we don't attach to it. Part of the suffering I think we have here is that attachment to time. But it keeps things in an order of a storyline, and that's what we're here to experience. So to me, everything is just as it should be. And if we stop judging that, we let go of that suffering. It was never meant to be this way. Literally, they showed me that Eden's been here all along. It's just with free will choices, we drop from that frequency to match that experience. So now we're working our way back to that, I guess you would say. But mostly, you know, authenticity. No matter how weird you think you are or your experience sound, be authentic in them, own them. They're yours. That's your truth. Nobody can change that. And just the sovereignty to let everybody else just be, not judge it, not look at it, just be with it, sit with it. And last, just that joy. They tell me to right now, especially, to find that childlike innocence. You remember how, like, even the find your nose, I got your nose, how magical that seemed as a little kid, right? We forget the magic of this universe and how everything's created and here for us and a part of us. We're supposed to be symbiotic with it. You know, so finding that joy, that magic of just being, and the gratitude for all of it, that's where abundance flows. We live in utter abundance. That lack mentality doesn't belong here. But I thank you for letting me share, and I hope that helps others understand our state of being.
Absolutely. That was extremely beautiful and resonated with me, but then also it seemed to just line up with a lot of the NDE stories that I've heard. You know, because usually I try to put myself in the position of the audience. What would they want to know? And for some reason, this question came to me, whether in operating in your spiritual gifts or just from your experience on being on the other side, do you think or feel that our life is mapped out, or are we creating it as we go?
And I do get asked that a lot recently, so that's synchronistic.
Yeah.
Some things, just from my experiences and others, I think probably is that there's certain points that are fixed that we wanted to experience. And just like Archangel Michael told me, you know, how deeply we experience them is up to us and how we attach to them. So, because I've literally had an experience where I avoided a car accident more than once, where they showed me the other timeline playing out at the same time, right? Like, so, and the one I crashed and burned and died, and the other one I missed it completely, and they showed me the ghosting of it, right? So how we experience things is kind of up to us. Like, it's already part of the story, but whether you have a sniffle or pneumonia, you know what I mean? It's how in depth and how much energy you feed that particular point along the thing. But we have the free will choices. You know, like I told you, I was given these deja vus to know I was on the path that I originally chose, and for the end goal of my program, right, so to speak. You know, so I know we planned some of these things that we want to experience. And, you know, I don't know, you know, it was interesting because my first death, I was like, no, I'm not going. And by the fourth, and the understanding had increased to get me back in there, because I understand, you know, what a gift it is to have a human form and experience it from this side of the veil, so to speak. So for your question, I feel like it's everything all at once. Oh, that's the name of a new movie, isn't it? I haven't seen it yet. Everywhere, there's something like that. But it really is kind of like that, because there's all these potentialities, and how you choose them is up to you. And like I said, if you're not choosing them, there might be another fractal of you that is. And so to me, it's not that it's like set in stone. They showed me it's more like a choose your own adventure book. Like, these are your available 10 potentials for what this storyline is. Which do you want to choose?
Gotcha.
So it is, but it isn't. You know, I hope that answers your question. But I've kind of seen that, and it's interesting because I do some work about soul connection. I call it the soul cloud, like all the fractals of that your particular oversoul, and how each of those builds upon your experience, and that different fractals of it work through you at different times. That's why your fears or your likes may change. And I've really seen that in the work I do, because I reconnect some of that. And it's funny because some of these other lives will be like, oh, they get that from me. Almost like a parent would, like, oh, their love of books is from me, and they'll be all like that, because I go to that quantum space where I can connect to them. So it's really interesting how that goes, and we don't realize how much of that flows through us. Um, trying to get in all the experiences we want while we're in a body. That soul groups go, well, that's not soul group, that's a little different. But this soul cloud of all the things you've ever been is like, oh, I want to do this. And oh, remember, we promised ourselves we would do this time. I see and hear all of that. So, and sometimes those fractals switch in, just like I have an understanding of, like, integrating that energy. And some people aren't aware or fight it. That's where I don't know if I can bring this up, but like, where schizophrenia, from my understanding, is where that comes from, because they're not aligning with these incoming energies for the next shift of where they said they wanted to experience. Because let's say, like I said, like the one was a scientist. So he's like, we're going to research this. And so you need this knowledge for this. So that energy is trying to come in. And if their energy antenna, whatever you want it, I call it a channel, their light channel isn't quite in alignment with it, that's where you have that dissonance. But I was shown that these energies and talent, skills, abilities, whatever you want to call them, are trying to connect with you for the next thing you want to choose to experience or work through, and they have a better knowledge of, so sometimes when people are like, wow, I've really changed, or like I said, a sudden fear. I mean, I even had that where, in a past life regression, I was this girl, and she was attacked, let's just say, I'll put it that way, for YouTube's sake, and choked, and they thought she was dead, so they buried her alive. So I started to have this anxious reaction to mold and breaking down leaves, because it was a dense forest, and that smell was, where I was buried alive, and it started to trigger me, and so I asked during the thing, why am I suddenly, affected by that? And it's just gotten intense the older I get, and that was why. And then I was able to let go of it. So there's different things like that, and I've had people where, like, and even loved ones, like, suddenly they don't like water, or they don't want to, or they get agoraphobia. Well, it's because they were locked in a cage in a different life, all these different things. So that particular aspect is coming in, and suddenly you have that. But all of these things are healable with recognition, just like how I recognized that past life and was able to heal the pain I had carried for so long. So I think that plays a lot into it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I sometimes attend a Japanese dojo, and the instructor there, she talked about how she, and I want to make sure I give her story justice, but she talked about right, she talked about how she wasn't a person who could project her voice, and she was in the chanting phase of this particular Buddhist sect, and it came to her that a relative had choked, someone from a past life had choked to death. Once she brought recognition to that, it instantly, like, her throat opened up, and she was fine. And so when I hear you say that, I think, wow, that spans over religions. That spans, that pertains to anybody and everything. And I know that movie because I have it myself. Everything, anywhere. I can't remember. I thought I had it.
Yeah,
When you said,
my
but I
friends keep
know this.
recommending it to me because they're like, you would totally get this movie,
Yeah,
because I've experienced different timelines, different dimensions, different consciousness, and even being in that quantum space and connecting people to, like, things that I would have never really even believed unless I was seeing them and validating them. I'm like, because this pertains to, I hear a lot of, I don't hear a lot of near-death experiences. I mean, I do facilitate sharing
mm,
groups in that
mhm,
sense, but I'm bad. I've only watched like 2 near-death interviews. Okay. Only because one I was called to, and she ended up saying, if this resonates with you, you're part of my jump team, my mission. And I was like, yeah, that's why I'm watching you, So whatever spirit calls me to. But this particular thing is that, I see that happening with a lot of people of these remembrances and things that they're not sure. Am I imagining this? Or has this, did this really happen? And sometimes when you connect to that collective consciousness, people think, you hear so many people, I was Joan of Arc, I was Mary Magdalene, I was, all these people, because when you actually get that connection at first until you understand it, you're in the stream of all that is. So you can tap into anything. Like, I see the Akashic records like a movie, or sometimes I see them like TV screens and I'll see things play out or be able to read that, like, and that's how I can tell, I don't always like to say this, but like it's like being a human lie detector, because if something isn't authentic that somebody is telling me, there'll be no movie. If I can move through the experience with you and see it, it happened. So that's how I can tell the difference.
Yeah.
I read energy basically, and that's energetic, but that's how I tell the difference. And so it's kind of interesting, I don't call people out on it. I'm just like, yeah. And it could be that the story is true, but they're embellishing or different stuff. And this is where my fourth death experience comes in, and that's where spirit cries for authenticity, because more and more people, they told me, will be able to see through all this. So like, if you're not telling it authentically as it happened, even if you're trying to like embellish or any of these things, it won't read the same because it's not carrying the same light code. They told me it's light code. When we speak, because we were never like meant to be speaking, everything is sound and frequency, even the heavens, so that's my understanding of it, how I experienced it. So when we speak, they told me like my voice has a healing frequency, or I can read energy by just talking to somebody because I can read it in their voice. And it was interesting because a fellow NDE friend of mine does bioacoustic, and I had her on my show because there was it backed up everything I said, because it could read frequencies, tell what was wrong in the body, even what your personality type is. And I think it's so funny because so much of our technology, is really mimicking our spiritual gifts that we have forgotten, and so, well, our abilities. I don't like to say gifts per se, but so it's really interesting how all of that plays in. And they even told me that the future of healing is sound and frequency, and that the original temples and these original things that were built, even the pyramids, were all about that sound and frequency. They went there to cleanse, and remove any energetic frequencies that were out of alignment and everything else. So the more I understand all of that, the more I can see, where we're headed, I guess you would put. Yeah.
What a lot of what you said is how I move through life, even personally. I have my own light language. Parallel realities is my wheelhouse. I'm actually doing a series on that now with my community. So I really appreciate you, taking the time and even expounding on it. Like I love that you didn't just talk about your experience, but you begin to explain it, because there are many of us who it's like we feel something, we know something is there, but we're still not able to yet connect the dots. And I think what you did during this interview that I love so much, Lorela, is that you are able to connect the dots for a lot of our listeners, to the point where some of them will go, yeah, okay, now I get it, which is everything, which is everything.
It is.
As
It switches on. They show me, like, they even said this, like I'm a switch. I was given that code, like, to click
yeah,
people on. They showed
yeah,
me it's like a string of lights going down, like each one clicks the next. You carry the code for the next person, the next person. We all agreed to carry certain codes to click off
ab-
for other people.
absolutely. So I want to again thank you so much. I feel like I want to have conversations with you beyond this. So
Yeah, I'm like,
don't
I
be
want to hear yours.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, like there's so much that
Yeah,
is
yeah.
that has come out of these experiences. But again, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I appreciate
Thank you
you
for
so
having
much.
me.
Absolutely. I think our my listeners are going to get so much from that. And I want to speak to the listeners in this moment. For those who are watching this podcast, watching this amazing soul, um, how, actually, Lorela, how can people reach out to you either for your services, being able to maybe connect with you one-on-one to help connect the dots better. Yeah, how can people reach out to you? How can people find you?
Okay. Right now I am finishing up my website, but it still has the contact form. So it's the same name, 𝐿oreLiDrock.com. So
Okay.
they can just send me a message through there. I also have a Calendly with all my appointments and things that I do. And it's, Calendly at Lorelai, / /LorelaiDrock.com. So
Right.
I mean Lorelai Drock, excuse me. So either of those tells you kind of a little bit about what I do, and you can connect with me there.
Awesome. And all that information will be in the description below. So, Lorelai, thank you again. I love you without even knowing you. And I appreciate you
No,
so
I
much.
say that to people too. I'm like, I love you. I know that might sound weird, but I love your energy.
Good, good. I feel like our energy is synced up. So awesome, awesome. So have an amazing rest of the day. And again, if you have any parting words, I know you've shared so much that we can kind of glean from. But any parting words as we go?
Um, I know I touched on a lot of different things, but they're telling me right now, I always say that because it's like a knowing, like, don't forget this. The other thing that's so important is watch what you speak into the world.
Yeah.
Even how you talk to your body listens to you. Like I said, it has its own consciousness. So many people say this is killing or this, and you're speaking that, and the universe is like the jinn. It will take it literally. Like, I want more of this experience because this is what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
This is what I'm
yeah.
speaking into it. So, not to make people like paranoid, but just mindful. Mindfulness, they stretch so much in my fourth death experience because, we create so much without even realizing it. And so I just want people to live their most authentic, joyful life in a very mindful way.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Lorelai. And as I say to everyone, to all of my listeners, I love you. I appreciate you. Namaste.